Raiders, this is Ezra, and welcome to my Bastion. It is May the 12th, and the Bivald of the Thorn fusion has just kicked off. I'm going to spend a few minutes today talking about how I'm approaching the fusion and the events I'm going to work on and the ones I'm not going to work on in order to complete. I think there's a few potential traps in here, so it might be worth you reading this and seeing my thoughts just to manage your fusion and your resources appropriately. If there are, radical changes to the plan or things don't unfold as I expect, I'll probably post an update video, but I don't think we're at the point where you need to see progress every day anymore. So let me pull up the fusion schedule that Raid published earlier today. So here we are at the calendar as published by Raid. It's on their website. Overall looks about in alignment with how the last couple of fusions have been. They make a big deal about you can get fragments by winning tournaments, which I think is not something you can really depend on. But other than that, things at first glance look relatively normal. I say that the standouts early on are the first Dungeon Divers events has 10 shards compared to the other ones that have 5, so that's a little bit weird. There's also an unusual gap here in the middle of the fusion when, not a lot is going on in Tournament World. It's the break between Ice Golem and Fire Knight, as well as, the end of the Champion Training and second Dungeon Divers event. So I loaded this into the spreadsheet I have been using in order to track fusions and made a little bit more of a detailed analysis. So here we go in what I'm tracking for the fusion. Color codes here are important, and here's where I found a few other things out. Starting today with the Dragon and the Dungeon Divers event, not bad, pretty typical. But in theory, a little bit of overlap between Dragon and Ice Golem and the first Dungeon Divers event, all dungeon things on or about 15 May, that Sunday, as well as the split between Ice Golem and Fire Knight with the second Dungeon Divers event. A little bit unusual compared to how things are normally done. What I think is most interesting here, though, is really the Champion Training event. It's got 15 total fragments available, and historically these have been quite a grind and have been quite brutal. To get the maximum fragments, it may be as many as 9,000 points, which is a lot of Champion Training to do. So I think, early next week, there's going to be a lot of contention for resources and for energy. So here's my plan to try to fix that. I'm going to avoid the Ice Golem event in its entirety, assume I will get 0 points or 0 fragments from that. Part of it also is Ice Golem. It's not a fun dungeon to farm. As well as I'm going to assume that for the Champion Training event, that the fragments are split up into a 5 and a 10 fragment threshold, and that the 5 fragment is relatively easy to get compared to the 10. So I'll do about a third of the Champion Training event, no Ice Golem, which then means you can double count energy between Dragon and Dungeon Divers before that's done, and complete essentially the first half of the fusion relatively easily. I'll also expect to have the Champion Training event done before Fire Knight starts, so I can complete the second Dungeon Divers event almost exclusively on Fire Knight. Then the third Dungeon Divers event coincides with Spider, which is, easy to do. That's a fast dungeon if you have a team that does it, and you can very reliably crank out points there. The other thing to be aware of is that to get the 10 fragments in the first Dungeon Divers event, it's 3,350 points. That is technically less than it was for the Gaius fusion. Like if we look back here and see the first Dungeon Divers event, it was 4,450 points, which was a very high point total, but it was also a day longer. So I think you're going to have to compress your work in this Dungeon Divers event a fair bit in order just to make the point threshold. You have to burn a little bit harder than expected. If you do your champion training event in either 12-3 brutal or 12-6 brutal, you will get some points for Dungeon Divers there as you get artifacts, but if you use brews and chickens for your points here, you won't get that so much. So I think that's where the first real hurdle is. Make sure you know what you're doing here for Dungeon Divers, and be super cognizant that the 15th and 16th there's a big point of contention with your energy between Dragon, potentially Ice Golem if you're going to do that, Dungeon Divers, and Champion Training. Other than that, I think if you can make it through the 17th and execute on your plan, then you should be good to go for the second half of the fusion. The other thing to know is that the Champion Chase event this weekend coincides with double rates for Sacred Shards. So it's probably going to take you, if you only pull shards, 5 Sacreds to do this. Then the Summon Rush next week will be a 10x champion event. So you can use either Sacred Shards there if you have some left, or Voids, or Ancients, depending on what you do. But I prefer the other way around, where Summon Rush is in alignment with the times 2 event, and Champion Chases with the 10x, because then you can take advantage of previously saved fragment champions here and save yourself some either shards or energy. But that's just a personal preference. So overall, that is my plan. Just avoid Ice Golem, go light in the champion training event, and then any grinding that has to happen will probably be at the end in either the champion training tournament, depending on the point totals there, or the third Dungeon Divers event, again, depending on the point totals there. But overall, Bivald looks like a reasonable champion. He doesn't hit hard like Sir Nick, but there's kind of a lack of good hit point based champions in the game anyway. So I'm going to go for him and execute according to plan, and at least I'll have him if I ever need him for anything. I think if you are still working on your Sacred Order faction wars, he can be really, really good because of the provoke just with wave controls. As you can see, I don't have a lot of Sacred Order legendary, so he will help fill that out. But depending on who you have, that may or may not be helpful for your Sacred Order faction wars. Also, there's hit point based champion secret rooms, I believe, in either Doom Tower or Hard Doom Tower. So he's got some use there. Overall, I think he's probably worth it. If you're fortunate enough to already have Sir Nick, certainly his value goes down because he's a really hard hitting hit point based champion. Or if you have Martyr, you worry less about provoke and instead use counterattack. But overall, at least for me and my account, he's worth it. And I think if you can execute according to plan and not kill yourself with too much contention early on, it should be very achievable. So thanks for watching the video. Let me know if your analysis is any different, or you think there's maybe even an easier way to complete the fusion with less energy, and I'm happy to talk about that. This is Ezron signing off. Thank you for your time.